The humid Nashville air hung thick with the scent of honeysuckle and barbecue smoke, familiar yet alienating. My parents' backyard was done up like a magazine spread for their annual family reunion. White tablecloths, mason jars filled with wildflowers, string lights twinkling between the old oak trees. Music drifted from hidden speakers, inevitably something featuring my brother Leo's aspiring and perpetually unsigned band. It was the perfect picture of Southern charm, a picture where I always felt slightly out of focus. I scanned the seating chart taped near the drinks table, looking for my name, Alex Hayes, and then I saw it. Not at the main tables with the adults, but tacked onto the corner of the smaller, brightly colored kids' table, a neatly printed card reading simply, "Second after Leo." A humorless laugh escaped me. Classic Mom, subtle as a sledgehammer. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Alex." Her voice chirped from behind me as she glided past with a platter of deviled eggs, perfectly coiffed, radiating serene matriarchal control. She paused to give my older brother, Leo, a conspiratorial wink where he held court near the makeshift stage, charming distant cousins with tales of his almost record deal. "It's just a little family joke. We all know Leo's the star." Leo, hearing his cue, threw back his head and laughed. That easy, charismatic sound that always drew people in, the sound that had convinced my parents for years to fund his artistic journey. "Yeah, bro," he called over, strumming an imaginary guitar. "Lighten up." It's funny. Except it wasn't funny. It was the narrative of my life in this family, condensed onto a 3x5 card. Leo, the golden child, the musician perpetually on the verge of greatness, always needing just a little more time, a little more support, read my money. And me, Alex, the quiet one, the responsible one, the chef who'd somehow built a small restaurant empire across Tennessee while they assumed I was still just playing with food. The reliable backup generator always there, rarely acknowledged. What none of them knew, what felt like a bizarre, almost hallucinatory secret clutched tight in my chest amidst the cheerful reunion chatter, was the email sitting in my secure inbox, received just 48 hours ago. A 9-figure buyout offer from a major international hospitality group for my entire restaurant collective. The culmination of 15 years of relentless work, sacrifice, and quiet ambition. An offer so staggering it still didn't feel entirely real. An offer that could change everything. An offer I hadn't breathed a word of to them. Why would I? They'd likely suggest I use it to fund Leo's next tour bus. I forced a tight smile, pocketed the offensive name tag, and grabbed a beer, melting into the background as instructed by years of passive conditioning. I watched Leo bask in this familial glow, watched my father, Richard, beam at him with vicarious pride, watched my mother, Elaine, flutter around ensuring her star had everything he needed. The old resentment simmered, familiar and unwelcome. Flashback, 10 years ago. Me, 22, working double shifts as a line cook, saving every penny. Leo, 24, calls collect from Vegas. Bit of bad luck at the tables, bro. Need some help getting home. Mom gets on the line next. "Alex, honey, he just needs a little help. Family helps family." I wired him the $1,500 I'd saved for a down payment on a used car. He never paid it back, never even mentioned it again. That was the first major loan. It wasn't the last. The smell of grilled chicken pulled me back to the present. Dinner was served buffet style. I filled a plate, found an empty spot on the edge of the patio away from the main tables. Then came the surprise. Mom clapped her hands together, silencing the chatter. "All right, everyone, Richard and I have a little something special planned." She beamed, her eyes finding Leo in the crowd. "Leo, honey, come up here." Leo sauntered up, feigning surprise. Mom gestured towards the garage. "Your grandfather always said his old Gibson belonged in the hands of a true artist," she announced, her voice catching with emotion. "He would have been so proud of the music you're making. We saved it for you." Dad emerged from the garage, carefully carrying a gleaming vintage Gibson Les Paul guitar case. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even I knew that guitar was worth a fortune, a collector's item Grandpa had rarely played but always treasured. Leo's eyes went wide. He took the case reverently, opened it, and lifted out the sunburst Les Paul, looking genuinely moved for perhaps the first time all day. Everyone applauded. Tears welled in Mom's eyes. Dad clapped Leo on the back. It was a perfect golden child moment. Then Mom turned towards me, her expression shifting to that familiar, pitying smile reserved for the less fortunate sibling. "And Alex, we didn't forget about you, sweetie." Her voice was overly bright, drawing attention. She ducked behind the gift table momentarily. I braced myself. She reappeared holding a set of pots and pans. Not new ones, not even a complete set. It looked like a mismatched collection pulled from the back of a thrift store shelf. Dented aluminum, chipped enamel, one handle visibly loose. "Here you go," she chirped, thrusting them into my hands. "We know how you love tinkering in the kitchen. Maybe these will help you finally get serious, start fixing up your little hobby." A few awkward titters went through the crowd. My cousin Jenny looked away, embarrassed for me. Leo, still cradling the Gibson, smirked. The contrast couldn't have been more deliberate, more humiliating. A priceless vintage guitar for the artist. A box of cast-off cookware for the hobbyist chef, whose restaurant group was currently fielding a 9-figure buyout offer. The old Alex, the one conditioned to keep the peace, would have mumbled thanks and faded back into the wallpaper. But the man standing there holding those dented pans, the man whose secret success felt like an alien presence inside him, reacted differently. A strange calm settled over me. I looked down at the pans, then up at my mother, and offered a small, polite smile. "Well, thanks, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "Always appreciate her practical gifts." She beamed, missing the undertone completely. "See?" she said to the crowd. "He understands!" They laughed, relieved the awkward moment was over, and turned their attention back to Leo and his guitar. I stood there for another minute, the weight of the cheap aluminum pans oddly grounding. Invisible again. Second after Leo. I set the pans down quietly on an empty table near the back fence. No one noticed. I walked towards the front gate, away from the laughter and the music and the suffocating weight of their expectations and blindness. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their approval. And I sure as hell didn't need their cast-off pots and pans. I had my own kitchen to run. An empire, actually. And they had absolutely no idea. Driving away from the reunion, the dented sauce pot rattling faintly on the passenger seat floor next to my briefcase, which contained the initial paperwork for the multi-million-dollar buyout offer, felt like shedding a heavy, ill-fitting coat I'd been forced to wear for decades. The humiliation of the gift ceremony, the casual cruelty of the second after Leo name tag, the easy way my parents crowned him king while handing me scraps. It wasn't new, just more blatant, more public this time. But something was new. The secret knowledge burning in my pocket, and the cold, hard decision crystallizing in my gut. The Bank of Alex was officially closed. Permanently. It wasn't a decision made lightly or just because of one bad reunion. It was the culmination of years, a slow bleed of funds and self-respect that had started long before Leo decided his true calling was experimental folk rock. Flashback, 10 years ago. I was 24, scrubbing grease traps after a brutal 14-hour shift as a sous chef at a fine dining place downtown, saving every dime trying to scrape together enough capital to maybe, someday, open my own tiny bistro. My phone rings. It's Mom. Her voice is wrapped in that familiar gauze of maternal concern laced with guilt. "Alex, honey, it's about Leo. He's having a little trouble making rent this month. His graphic design internship fell through. You know how competitive it is. Could you possibly just help him out this once? He feels terrible asking." I remember sighing, looking at my own meager bank balance, calculating how many extra shifts I'd need to pick up. But it was Leo, golden boy Leo, who was finding himself. I wired him $800 just this once. Flashback. 7 years ago. My first restaurant, Husk and Vine, and was barely afloat. I was working 18-hour days, chef, busboy, bookkeeper, all rolled into one. Leo calls, breathless with excitement. His band, the third one that year, landed a gig opening for a semi-known act. They just needed $2,000 for upgraded amps and travel expenses to really make an impression. "This could be it, Alex. Our big break." "Our break?" Dad gets on the phone later. "Son, your brother has real talent. This is important. Don't let a little money stand in the way of his dream." I took out a high-interest cash advance, telling myself it was an investment in family, even as I ate ramen for dinner for the next 2 months. The band broke up 3 weeks later after Leo spent the amp money on a weekend trip to Memphis with some girl. Flashback. 3 years ago. Sarah's Provisions, oops, meant Husk and Vine and my subsequent restaurants, were finally gaining traction, getting noticed by local food critics. I was exhausted but hopeful. Then the frantic call from Mom. Leo had maxed out 3 credit cards, unexpected expenses, networking costs, and the collectors were calling them. "We're on a fixed income, Alex," Mom cried. "Richard's pension barely covers the mortgage since, well, you know." I did know, since Dad quietly invested a chunk of it in one of Leo's failed startup ideas. "We could lose the house. You have to help." That time, it was $15,000 transferred directly to the credit card companies, wiping out the buffer I'd carefully saved for potential equipment upgrades at the restaurant. Leo sent a text. "The ex-bro. You the man." Sitting in my quiet, upscale condo miles away from their suburban drama, I pulled up my old bank statements on my laptop, the ones I meticulously archived. Driven by a cold curiosity after the reunion, I started tallying the transfers labeled Leo Help, Mom-Dad Emergency, Family Support, rent payments, car repairs, down payment on an apartment he later got evicted from, flights for auditions he bombed, seed money for podcasts that never aired, apps that never launched, vet bills for the rescue dog he adopted impulsively and later gave away. The total staring back at me from the spreadsheet was sickening. Over the past 7 years alone, conservatively calculated, $94,750, nearly $100,000 poured into the black hole of Leo's irresponsibility and my parents' willful enablement. $100,000 I could have reinvested in my business, saved for my own future, or simply kept for myself. And what did I get in return? Patronizing advice about being too serious, guilt trips about family obligation, and a rusty set of pots and pans. While I was building a restaurant group brick by painstaking brick, negotiating with suppliers at dawn, tasting hundreds of dishes, managing staff, sweating over profit margins, reinvesting every spare cent, they were living in a fantasy where Leo was the destined star, and I was the reliable, slightly dull ATM machine. They never asked about my struggles, my long hours, the risks I took. My success, when hints of it reached them, a good review, an expansion mentioned in the local paper, was treated as a mild curiosity, quickly overshadowed by Leo's latest almost breakthrough. The final straw hadn't been the reunion itself, but the phone call 3 days before it. Leo again. "Hey, man," his voice oozing that casual charm that always preceded a request. "So, crazy opportunity. This producer guy heard my demo. Wants me to fly out to LA next week for a meeting. Just need a little help with the flight and maybe some decent clothes so I don't look like a scrub." Something inside me, already numb from the intensity of the final buyout negotiations I was secretly juggling, simply shut down. The years of resentment, the quiet sacrifices, the constant emotional and financial drain, it reached critical mass. "No, Leo," I said, my voice calm, devoid of anger, almost detached. Silence on the other end. Then confused. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated. "I'm not funding this trip. I'm not funding anything anymore. You need to figure it out yourself." "Whoa, dude, what's your problem?" His voice shifted, annoyance creeping in. "It's just a flight. I'll pay you back." "No, you won't, Leo. You never do," I stated flatly. "And the problem isn't mine. I'm just making some financial adjustments, planning for my own future." "Your future?" he scoffed. "What future? You gonna be scrubbing pots forever?" Before the old Alex could rise to the bait, before the ingrained guilt could make me reconsider, I simply said, "Gotta go, Leo. Good luck with the meeting." And I hung up. That no, after years of reluctant yeses, felt like the first true structural change, the first step in demolishing the unhealthy dynamic that had defined my family relationships for far too long. The pots and pans at the reunion were just confirmation that I'd made the right decision. The foundation was rotten. It was time to rebuild something new, somewhere else. Walking away from my parents' house after that explosive dinner felt like severing a gangrenous limb. There was pain, yes, but mostly an overwhelming sense of relief, of finality. The silence from their end in the following days was absolute, confirming the boundary was for now holding. Like I threw myself into work, finalizing the complex details of the restaurant group buyout with the hospitality conglomerate, managing operations across my locations, planning menus. The sheer scale of the impending deal, the $20 million valuation that had stunned my family into silence, felt both validating and surreal. It was proof I hadn't just kept up. I'd lapped them multiple times over while they were busy praising Leo's potential. Yet a nagging unease lingered beneath the surface of my newfound freedom. Something about their reaction at dinner. It wasn't just shock at my success. It was the specific way Leo had scoffed at the $95,000, the way Mom had defended their sacrifices, the way Dad had avoided my eyes when confronted with the list. It felt like more than just embarrassment. It felt like panic, like I'd inadvertently touched a nerve deeper than just their pride or Leo's funding source being cut off. Why had they been so desperate for so long to paint me as the stable but unremarkable provider while propping up Leo, even when it clearly cost them, or rather cost me, so much? My mind kept circling back to Aunt Carol, Mom's older sister, estranged for nearly 15 years. I barely remembered her. Sharp and cynical, always seemed faintly amused by Eleanor's social climbing and Richard's quiet complacency. There had been a blow-up argument years ago, hushed whispers about finances, about Grandpa's will, after which Carol became persona non grata. Mom always vaguely referred to her as difficult or bitter. Now I wondered if difficult simply meant unwilling to play along. Driven by this persistent gut feeling that I still didn't have the full picture, I decided to reach out. Finding her wasn't easy. She lived a quiet life, running an antique bookstore in a small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I found the store's email address online and sent a cautious message. Aunt Carol, it's Alex Hayes, Eleanor's son. It's been many years. Things have recently shifted significantly with my parents and Leo. I've stepped away completely after discovering some long-term financial discrepancies. I know you distanced yourself years ago, and I respect that, but I have a feeling you might understand more about the family's financial dynamics than I ever did. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the chance to talk. Off the record. Understand completely if not. Best, Alex. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 days later my phone rang with an unfamiliar North Carolina area code. Alex? It's Carol. Got your email. Took you long enough to see the light. Her voice was exactly as I remembered. Dry, direct, with an undercurrent of weary amusement. We talked for over an hour. She didn't pry into the details of my recent blow-up, but seemed to grasp the situation instantly. Let me guess, she said wryly. Leo needed another bailout. You finally said no, and Eleanor played the martyr card while Richard stared at his shoes? Pretty much, I admitted. But it feels like more than just enabling Leo. It felt desperate when I cut them off financially. Just as I was processing the depth of this calculated betrayal, my burner phone rang, a number I recognized as Leo's. Somehow getting through my blocks, maybe using a friend's phone. I stared at it, then on impulse answered, curious to hear what desperate script he concocted this time. Alex? You gotta listen. Leo's voice was tight with panic, stripped of its usual easy charm. That letter from Carol, it's not... They made me agree to the trust stuff. Said it was just legal planning, said you wouldn't understand, that you didn't need it like I did. They told me you wanted to be left alone. I leaned back in my chair, silent, letting him flounder. Look, he continued, rambling now, I know I took the money, okay? But I always meant to pay you back. Once the band took off, or this new podcast idea, and Mom and Dad, they kept saying you wanted to help, that it made you feel good. Did it make you feel good, Leo? I asked quietly. Taking money from me, month after month, year after year, knowing you had a six-figure safety net waiting for you while I was working 80-hour weeks to keep my restaurants afloat and pay your bills. A choked silence on the other end. I didn't think... No, I cut him off. You didn't think. None of you did. You didn't think I'd find out. You didn't think I'd ever say no. You didn't think I mattered beyond what I could provide. I took a breath. There's nothing left to say, Leo. Don't call me again. I hung up before he could reply, feeling not anger, but a profound, weary emptiness. His excuses were pathetic, transparent. He was just a puppet mouthing the lines my parents had fed him his whole life. I focused back on finalizing the restaurant group buyout, a welcome distraction involving complex negotiations, legal reviews, and planning the transition. It felt clean, professional, a world away from the toxic swamp of my family's finances. Then about 3 weeks later came the news that truly signaled the crumbling of their facade. It arrived not via a family member, but through Ms. Davenport. Alex, she said, her voice carefully neutral over the phone. Something significant has developed regarding your parents' and brother's finances. I monitor public filings related to ongoing cases. It appears the IRS has placed a federal tax lien on the Magnolia Bloom Trust and initiated a full audit of your parents' and Leo's personal finances, freezing all associated accounts. I sat bolt upright. The IRS? How? I didn't report anything. You didn't have to, Ms. Davenport explained. From the preliminary records I pulled after verifying Carol's information, it seems the trust hasn't been managed, shall we say, prudently. More importantly, it appears that shortly after your dinner confrontation, likely in a panic after you revealed your success and cut off Leo's funding, your parents attempted a series of large, improperly structured gift transfers from the trust directly to Leo's personal accounts. Transfers far exceeding legal gift tax limits and likely using questionable valuations to avoid scrutiny. It seems their desperate attempt to secure Leo's future financially after karma, delivered not by my hand, but by their own greed and panic. They had built a secret kingdom on lies, and in their scramble to protect it after I exposed their hypocrisy, they had inadvertently set fire to the drawbridge themselves. Accounts frozen? I clarified. Properties under audit? Effectively, yes, Ms. Davenport confirmed. Leo's safety net just evaporated, and your parents are likely facing serious scrutiny regarding the trust's management and their own tax liabilities over many years. This will get messy for them. Very messy. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. There was grim satisfaction, yes, but also a surprising lack of vindication. Seeing them face consequences brought about by their own actions felt less like revenge, and more like the inevitable balancing of long-skewed scales. They had built their lives on a foundation of deceit, and now it was collapsing under its own weight. My phone remained silent from their end. No desperate calls this time. Just the deafening silence of people realizing their carefully constructed world was imploding, and the one person they might have turned to, the person they had systematically exploited and underestimated for decades, was no longer available for comment. I focused on my own path, finalized the $20 million buyout, set up my new penthouse apartment, a space that felt clean, mine, untainted, reconnected with my childhood friend Sam, who listened to the whole saga with wide-eyed disbelief and unwavering support. I worked with my lawyer to quietly ensure my own financial separation from the family's impending IRS storm was absolute. Their crumbling facade, viewed from the distance I had finally created, wasn't a spectacle I needed to watch closely. It was simply background noise, the fading echo of a life I had thankfully escaped. My focus was forward now, on the possibilities unfolding before me, possibilities built not on secrets and manipulation, but on the solid ground of my own hard-won success and integrity. A year can change everything. 12 months after walking out of my parents' house, leaving behind the wreckage of lifelong expectations and betrayals, my world felt fundamentally different. The sale of the restaurant group had finalized smoothly, the transition managed professionally. The 9-figure sum sat comfortably in managed accounts, a silent testament to 15 years of relentless work they never acknowledged. But it wasn't the money itself that defined the change. It was the quiet certainty of my own path, the liberation from their narrative. I'd bought the penthouse downtown not as a statement of wealth, but as a declaration of independence, a space filled with light, clean lines, and zero ghosts. My new life took shape within its walls. I consulted part-time for the group that acquired my restaurants, enjoying the strategy without the daily operational grind. More importantly, I poured energy into establishing the Eleanor Hayes Culinary Grant. Yes, ironically named after my mother, but focused on true nurturing, providing funding and mentorship for aspiring young chefs from underprivileged backgrounds in Nashville, kids who had talent but lacked the family connections or financial backing Leo took for granted. News about my family filtered through occasionally, mostly via Aunt Carol or brief, unavoidable mentions from mutual acquaintances Sam, my childhood friend, might relay. The IRS audit was apparently ongoing, a tangled mess of a questionable trust management and years of obscured finances. Leo, cut off from the trust fund and lacking any real marketable skills beyond fading charm, was reportedly struggling, bouncing between temporary gigs and relying on dwindling parental support, whatever wasn't frozen. My parents had retreated, socially isolated, their carefully maintained image fractured by the whispers surrounding the audit and my abrupt, successful departure from the family script. I felt a distant pity, perhaps, but no obligation, no lingering anger. Their choices, their consequences. My focus was elsewhere. Then came the email that provided an unexpected, poignant form of validation. The subject line was simple: a thank you note from Maya Ellis. Maya, Leo's ex-girlfriend, the one he'd presumably dated before or during his time bleeding me dry. I opened it cautiously. "Mr. Hayes," it began, "you don't know me well. We only met briefly once or twice when I was with Leo. I'm writing because I recently saw an article in Forbes about the sale of your restaurant group and the launch of your culinary grant program. Seeing your name, your actual success, confirmed something I suspected but couldn't prove for a long time. Leo always spoke dismissively of you. He painted you as the jealous, less talented brother, someone holding him back, someone whose little diner was barely staying afloat. He used your supposed lack of success as leverage, claiming you were bitter, that you owed him support because he was the real artist, destined for greatness. He borrowed money from me constantly, money I couldn't afford, often implying it was to cover family emergencies you refused to help with, or using your name to secure business opportunities that never materialized. Reading about your real accomplishments, seeing the scale of what you actually built while he was spinning those lies, it was like a light switch flipped. It helped me finally see the full picture of his manipulation, not just towards you, but towards me and likely others. It gave me the clarity I needed to completely cut ties and rebuild my own finances and self-respect. I just wanted to say thank you. Your success, even though you didn't know it, helped someone else escape his orbit too. Wishing you continued success. Maya." I read the email twice, a lump forming in my throat. All those years, Leo hadn't just been taking my money. He'd been using a twisted version of me, my supposed failure, as a tool to manipulate others to fuel his own parasitic existence. And my eventual quiet success, made public, had inadvertently become a beacon of truth for someone else he'd wronged. It wasn't revenge, but it felt like a profound form of justice, a validation that resonated deeper than any dollar amount. A few weeks later, I stood on the stage at the Nashville Culinary Institute, not as a CEO or a millionaire, but as Alex Hayes, chef and entrepreneur, invited to give the commencement address. Looking out at the sea of young, hopeful faces in Chef White's reminded me of my own early days. The fire, the fear, the relentless drive. I didn't talk about buyouts or valuations. I talked about resilience, about the importance of building your own foundation, brick by brick, even when people tell you you're aiming too high or not working hard enough in the right way. I talked about ignoring the noise, the critics, the doubters, sometimes even the voices closest to you that tried to keep you small. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's perception, I told them, my voice steady. It's forged in the heat of your own kitchen, in the integrity of your craft, in the refusal to let anyone else define your limits. I announced the first round of Eleanor Hayes culinary grant recipients, watching their faces light up, feeling my mother's true spirit, the one that encouraged my early experiments before my father and brother's needs overshadowed everything. Finally honored. Later that evening, back in my quiet penthouse, I poured myself a glass of aged bourbon. Sam called, congratulating me on the speech. He'd watched the live stream. We made plans for a fishing trip, the easy camaraderie a welcome balm. I thought about my family, not with anger anymore, but with a sense of finality. They were adrift in their self-made storm, still likely blaming everyone but themselves. Their chapter in my life was closed, locked, the key thrown away. My peace no longer depended on their approval or their downfall. My success wasn't about the money or the penthouse or even the restaurants anymore. It was about standing here, in my own space, defined by my own work and my own values. It was about funding dreams for other kids instead of funding delusions. It was about answering only to myself. I raised my glass to the glittering Nashville skyline. The second son, the fallback, the poor husband. Those characters were dead and buried. Alex Hayes, chef, founder, maybe even philanthropist, was just getting started, and this time I was writing the entire script myself. Carol sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. "Okay, kid. You want the real story, the one Ellie and Richard buried years ago? It's not pretty." And then she told me about Grandpa's will, which had left a substantial sum and several properties intended to be divided equally, or at least held in trust for both grandsons. About how, shortly after Grandpa passed, Richard and Eleanor, citing Leo's artistic temperament and need for security, had convinced a naive executor, or perhaps a complicit one, to restructure things. They set up a complex family trust, legally putting most of those inherited assets, including co-ownership stakes in properties I didn't even know existed, and a significant investment portfolio, primarily under Leo's name and control, with them as trustees until he matured. They told the rest of the family, what little of it there is, that you were already doing so well, so independent, Carol explained, her voice laced with old anger, that you didn't need the inheritance like Leo did, that you were maybe even a bit ungrateful for what you already had. My blood ran cold, while they were bleeding me dry, telling me they were broke, guilting me into funding Leo's entire adult life. They had secretly diverted a substantial family inheritance solely to him, an inheritance likely worth hundreds of thousands and maybe more. But that's not all, Carol continued, her voice dropping. To justify this to themselves and anyone who asked questions, they started rewriting history, telling people you were difficult as a teenager, that you were always distant, that you refused to help with family finances when asked. They painted you as the cold, successful son who abandoned his struggling family, while Leo was the sensitive soul who stayed close. It made it easier for them to rationalize funneling everything his way, and easier to pressure you by implying you owed them. It clicked. The weird vibes from distant cousins at the reunion, the occasional pitying looks, the constant narrative of me being stable but somehow lacking compared to Leo's potential. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a calculated long-term campaign of financial diversion and character assassination, all happening behind my back. They hadn't just taken my money, they'd stolen my reputation within my own extended family. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice thick. I tried, Alex, years ago, Carol said wearily. Argued with Ellie, tried to talk sense into Richard. It ended with screaming matches, accusations. They cut me off completely. Said I was jealous, bitter. Eventually I gave up. It wasn't my life to fix, but, she added, I always kept copies of the original will, the initial trust documents before they restructured it, just in case. Sounds like in case finally arrived. She promised to securely email me everything she had. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a long time. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more insidious than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about enabling Leo. It was about actively, secretly enriching him while systematically exploiting me and manipulating everyone around them. The $95,000 I'd calculated felt like pocket change compared to the scale of this long con. My anger returned, cold and absolute. I immediately called Ms. Davenport, my lawyer, and relayed Carol's story. Get me everything, I instructed her. Property deeds, trust filings, bank records going back 15 years. I want proof. Ms. Davenport, sensing the shift in my voice, didn't question it. Consider it done, Alex, she said. This just moved from a divorce settlement negotiation into a full-blown financial investigation. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture far uglier than just a spoiled golden child and enabling parents. This was calculated deception on a grand scale, and they had no idea I was now holding the map to their buried secrets. E-confirmation from Ms. Davenport arrived a week later, concise and devastating. Property records pulled from 3 counties, trust filings dating back over a decade. Aunt Carol's story was entirely accurate. Deeds showed joint tenancy between my parents and Leo on properties I'd been told were struggling rentals needing financial upkeep, paid by me, naturally. And the Magnolia Bloom Trust, established shortly after Grandpa's death, named Leo as the primary beneficiary, set to receive distributions starting at age 30, with Richard and Eleanor as trustees, controlling the substantial $400,000 plus initial value, likely much more now, assets in the meantime. Assets they had consistently claimed didn't exist while simultaneously pressuring me for money. The cold, hard proof of their decades-long financial gaslighting lay spread across my desk,